Hello, everyone, and welcome to the October free webinar from the Center for Financial Social Work. We're so glad you're here, and we're so glad to have Amanda Stilianu with us today. And she, as you can see, is joining us live from New York City. And you can also see on our first slide here that she is the Director of Research and Evaluation at Safe Horizon in New York City and a doctoral candidate at Rutgers University School of Social Work. Thanks so much for joining us, Amanda. Before we turn this over to Amanda, I just want to do a little housekeeping and tell you what this day will look like, or this workshop will look like. Up in the right-hand corner, you will see a rectangular box. It should look similar to this, and you will see that there is a place to ask questions. And when you do, be sure to hit send so that we receive your question. You'll see there are two arrows so that you can hide that toolbar by clicking on those arrows, and then to reopen the toolbar, simply click the double arrows again. That's if you want to see, be sure to see the whole slide. And sometimes I will ask questions, or we will ask questions, and you might want to put the answer in there. I know that when Amanda does her part, she's going to have you work with her through the chat box. So not only do we have a wonderful presenter today, but she also is pulling out all the technical skills and tools that we haven't used in all these years of presenting webinars. Okay, so today's agenda is the welcome, which we're doing right now. We'll then move on to just a few slides so that all of our new attendees can know about financial social work and why we're offering this free session. Then Amanda will talk to you about helping clients escape economic abuse. And then we'll just mention financial social work certification, and then close with your questions and answers. I imagine that the reason some of you joined us today was a result of the terrific social media campaign that Eric launched for us. You can see that he started with this statistic. Well, I need to stay with the same advancing technique I see. Okay, so he started with the fact that 57% of cities cite domestic violence against women and children as the top cause of homelessness. And 75% of Americans fail to connect domestic violence with economic abuse. And 74% of abused women stayed with an abusive partner for longer than they wanted because of economic reasons. So certainly one of the reasons I'm so excited to be doing this session is because I always wanted to do something on economic abuse for Domestic Violence Month through the Center for Financial Social Work. That hasn't happened in the past, and what's particularly of interest to me this year is that it seems the issue and the role of economic and financial abuse in domestic violence seems to have come to the forefront. So this, for me, is about the feminization of poverty, because poverty does have a woman's face. And women's issues is a very important topic and connection to me when it comes to financial social work. And when you look at this particular slide, you can see in Maslow's hierarchy of needs where he does refer right here at the foundation to the importance and necessity when it comes to safety, the role of money when it comes to safety. So Financial social work began with a term that I created about 16 or 17 years ago, and that word was feminomics. And if any of you would like to venture a guess as to what feminomics means, you can do that in the question box. If not, I'm just going to go right ahead and tell you what it means. When you create your own word, you get to create your own definition. And for me, the definition of feminomics is the gender of money. Now, often when I speak live and in person, people will say, well, what is the gender of money? And I can tell you that it has nothing to do with the fact that the face on every denomination of bills is the man's. So this is not a workshop on the gender of money or feminomics, so I'm just going to go ahead and tell you that there are 7 parts or components to feminomics. And these are covered in our certification because financial social work grew out of feminomics. And so the issues that we address are the fact that women earn less, often have physical and physical responsibility for children. Women have unique health care problems and access challenges and are often charged more for products and services. Women are disproportionately impacted by financial illiteracy. They live longer and have gender-specific obstacles resulting from how they are socialized. So financial social work is all about empowering survivors. It's as much about building sense of self and self-esteem, self-respect, and improving personal awareness as it is about expanding financial knowledge. And so that's why we're doing this session today, and that's why it's so important to us. So this will be an interactive session. You'll get a chance to raise your hands, to participate in polls, and to do Q&A. Let's do our first of only 2 polls. And I will open that up now and ask you where you are located. I did not use this poll the last time we did a webinar, only to find out afterwards that we had attendees from Egypt, from Canada, and from a couple other countries. Well, we have a significant representation from the South. About 76% of you have voted or indicated where you're located. So I'll give you a few more seconds to decide if you want to share that information with us anonymously. It's something we find of interest. Okay, so we're up to 83%. I'm going to count that down and close it. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, and I will close that and share it with you. And you can see we have a lot of people from Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, and a pretty even representation from the rest of the country. So I will hide that and go head back and finish up with financial social work. Our mission is to help men and women begin the journey to sustainable, long-term financial behavioral change, which is because we know that until and unless behavior changes, nothing changes. And our goal is very much to contribute to personal, financial, and professional change. So what makes financial social work special? Well, we think The reason is because it is a behavioral model. It is, of course, experiential, introspective, strength-based. It's multidisciplinary and heavily psychosocial. It works as well with individuals as it does with groups, and this is what it looks like. It's an ongoing process of engagement, education, motivation, validation, and support, because we know that that's what people need to create sustainable long-term financial behavioral change. And at its essence, it is about the fact that it's our relationship with our money that drives, that is incorrect. It's our relationship with our money that drives our financial behavior. And it is absolutely our financial behavior, how we earn, spend, save, and share, that determines our financial circumstances. And this arrow is where the magic happens. It happens because we change our behavior, and it's our behavior that determines our financial circumstances. These are just a few of our agency clients, and of course we do have graduates who work in domestic violence. So our second and last poll before I turn this over to Amanda is to ask you, which part of the financial social work community are you active in? Part or parts? You can indicate more than one. Well, no one's involved with financial social work other than being on this webinar? Can everyone see that, Dorley?
We can't see the options.
I wonder why not. It says it's in progress.
We only see the question.
Well, that's not going to work then.
Now we see it.
Oh, okay. I wonder what that was about. As we suspected, we have a lot of people new to financial social work, so I'm pleased that I took the opportunity to tell you about it. Our Facebook page is where we post something motivational every morning. Twitter, we share relevant and timely articles each day about the financial topics that are important and that matter to our community. So 80% of you have voted. I'll give you another few seconds and count it down. And if you are new to financial social work, I hope you'll join us on some of these other social media. Okay, I'll count it down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I will close this poll and share it with you, so you can see. Okay, so I will hide that, and Amanda, I will go ahead and turn this over to you. Change. Okay.
Thank you very much. As Rita said, my name is Amanda Stiliano, and I'm the Director of Research and Evaluation at Safe Horizon in New York City. For those of you who aren't familiar, Safe Horizon is the nation's largest victim assistance program. We're available to provide services to victims of any crime in all 5 boroughs of New York City. Although the vast majority of our clients are victims of interpersonal crime, particularly domestic violence, sexual assault, child abuse, and human trafficking. And so I very much appreciate the opportunity today to share with you kind of our work in economic abuse and identifying economic abuse, talking about economic abuse with clients, and working on financial literacy with clients. So again, thank you very much, Financial Social Work, for giving me this opportunity. And we certainly value the work that you do in training social workers and practitioners to work with clients in financial social work, and particularly doing it from an empowerment model, which is something that's very important to us here at Safe Horizon. So I'd like to start today. We're going to talk about kind of two topics today. One, we're going to talk about economic abuse, and then we're also going to talk about what do we do about economic abuse with clients, which is when we'll talk about financial social work. And so I'd like to just start off today with a few questions. So for those of you who are either tech savvy or feel like being a little adventurous today with technology, you'll see in the box on the right hand of your screen, there's an option that says chat. And it should be set up on the bottom. It probably says something like organizers and panelists only, so that we can see what you're writing in there. And so the first question I have for you today are what barriers do you face in discussing financial abuse and or financial literacy with clients? What has been your experience, and what gets in the way in having this conversation? So if you want to try to enter it there into the chat, and I'll read some of these as they pop up.
Are you getting any responses, Amanda?
Oh, it's doing something, but it doesn't look like responses are coming up here, so we may have to skip this section. We'll see what's happening here. I don't know why that doesn't seem to be working. So we'll skip that. I don't want to kind of waste people's time if that's not working. Let me move over a PowerPoint here so you can see this as well. And usually what I hear from people is that a lot of times what gets in the way is our own discomfort on talking about financial abuse and financial literacy with clients. And oftentimes we haven't been taught this. Many of us didn't get this either from our family of origins or from school or through formal education. And so a lot of times we don't feel prepared to have this conversation with clients. And so I'm really excited that we have a group of social workers or other practitioners today that are really excited on kind of learning this material and being comfortable using it with clients. So again, thank you for that opportunity. The one thing I always like to let people know is kind of my announcement on my use of pronouns. And so you'll notice today that I will frequently refer to perpetrators with the pronoun of he and victims with the pronoun of she. But I certainly want to recognize that intimate partner violence is something that happens by female perpetrators against male victims, and also within LGBTQ relationships. But because the vast majority of domestic violence and intimate partner violence occurs by male perpetrators against female victims, those would be the pronouns that I'll use today. So I'd like to start off about talking about what does a financially healthy relationship look like? And that probably seems in some way like an obvious question. But I think it can be difficult in working with clients when we hear different ways that people in relationships manage their finances and how they decide who manages those finances. We know that there's often gender differences in managing finances. There may be cultural differences in managing finances, and also between different age groups. And so ultimately what we're looking at when we talk with clients about a financially healthy relationship is one where there's equal power over and access to financial resources and collaboration in making financial decisions. So if you're working with a client who says, you know, my husband manages the finances and he takes care of that, and you find out that that's a decision that they made together and that she is comfortable with, then that would be a financially healthy relationship, that we're really looking for kind of equal agreement and equal decision making in both what happens with the finances and also who's responsible for managing the finances. And then in contrast, what is economic abuse? And so the definition that I use is when an abuser controls the victim's ability to access, maintain, or improve her financial resources in order to gain power and control over the victim. And so this we'll talk about in a little bit can be kind of a wide range of different behaviors that an abuser uses in order to gain power and control over the victim. And economic abuse is particularly important when we're working in domestic violence because we know that the #1 reason victims don't leave abusive relationships is because of financial dependence. And so it's really critical that we're working with clients to help them build their financial self-efficacy and helping them engage in behaviors that are going to set up kind of long-term financial independence both for them and their family. And so within economic abuse, what we actually see is there's 3 different types of economic abuse. And these are economic control, employment and education sabotage, and economic exploitation. So the first one, economic control, is a form of economic abuse in which the perpetrator monitors and restricts the victim's ability to freely use resources in his or her life. And so these are going to be things like making the victim ask for money, demanding to know how money was spent, demanding that the victim give receipts and or change when money is spent, and keeping the financial information from the victim. So you may work with a victim that doesn't know where money is being stored, doesn't know if they have a bank account, what bank it may be through. You may work with a client that is in a cash economy and has to hand over the cash to the abuser, and so she doesn't have access to any of the cash. And what I talk a lot about when I think about kind of these economic abuse behaviors is we see kind of a continuum of behaviors from covert to overt behaviors. So similar to what we see when we talk about psychological and physical abuse, typically psychological abuse tends to be more covert. It's not as easy to put your finger on. Sometimes it's not clear whether or not it's abusive. So when we talk about things like name calling or continually calling the victim on the phone, trying to figure out where they are, sometimes the behavior in and of itself is difficult to identify as abuse, but when we take a step back and look at the whole picture, we see this pattern of kind of power and control that's being developed. And that's what we see here a lot of times in economic abuse, that a lot of clients may not identify these behaviors as economic abuse, may not identify that they're being controlled economically, but when we engage in a conversation, and we start finding out that they don't have access to money, they would like the access to money but aren't allowed to, you start to see again this behavior of power and control occurring in the relationship. So then as we move up from covert to more overt behaviors, the next type of economic abuse is employment sabotage. And this is a form of economic abuse in which the perpetrator restricts the victim's access to education and or employment opportunities. And by restricting these opportunities, the perpetrator prevents the victim from obtaining his or her economic resources. And so these may include examples such as threatening to make the victim leave work or school, demanding that the victim quit her job or school, physical violence that occurs if the victim tries to go to work or school, or doing things purposely to keep the victim from going to work or school. And you'll hear a lot about that when you work with victims. They'll say things like, he knows that I need to leave at 8 a.m. for work, but he doesn't show up to watch the kids, and so she has to repeatedly call out at work, and she eventually loses her job. And so here we see a little more overt behaviors that are purposely being done to prevent the victim from being able to work or further her education, and ultimately what this is doing again is it's creating this financial dependence on the perpetrator. So it's really restricting the victim's ability to access her own way of providing for herself and really increasing that financial dependence. And then the third form, which is the most overt form of economic abuse, is economic exploitation. And this is a form of economic abuse in which the perpetrator either uses the victim's funds or commits certain acts that will create debt or ruin the victim's credit. So these examples would be things like spending the money that they needed for rent or other bills, paying bills late or not paying bills that are either in both of their names or in the victim's name, or building up debt under the victim's name by doing things like using her credit card, running up her phone bill. So this is more purposeful, overt behaviors in attempt to ruin a victim's credit. And so an example I use a lot is I worked with a client who had actually left her abuser. And on her birthday, she opened up her door, and there were all of these boxes that had been delivered to her door from all sorts of stores, from Pottery Barn, from Gap. And what she had found out was that her abuser opened up multiple credit cards under her name and went on a shopping spree and sent those all to her home. So that would be an example of kind of this economic exploitation of purposely trying to ruin someone's credit. And one of the things I like to point out when we talk about different forms of abuse is this form of abuse, economic exploitation, is typically the only form of economic abuse that's really illegal, where you can really get some sort of legal protection, although certainly it's not easy to do it. Whereas other forms, like when we talked about, and I'll go back here, economic control, because it's more covert, you know, if you are in, let's say, a relationship and the abuser doesn't give you access to your bank account, it's really hard to get legal action to protect yourself in that situation. So often victims are stuck where they're being financially abused but are often unsure of what type of steps to take in order to get out of this situation. And this is certainly where, you know, we come in and being able to provide that information to clients. And a few things to note that I think is important when we talk about economic abuse. This is research that I worked on where we talked to 457 survivors of intimate partner violence. And these were survivors from Texas, from the Midwest, from the Northeast, and from Puerto Rico. And we asked them what type of abuse they had experienced from the perpetrator within the past 12 months. And what you'll see here is we found that over 75% of them experienced physical violence, psychological violence, and economic violence in the past 12 months. And where I think that's important is often when a victim comes to us, the first thing out of their mouth is not typically "I'm being economically abused." Usually we're going to start by hearing stories about physical violence, potentially about psychological abuse, but often economic abuse is not the first thing that the client talks about. And that's where our role as social workers really gets involved in helping that client have that conversation and assess their financial safety. Because, you know, chances are that 3/4 of the women that come to us with either physical or psychological abuse are also experiencing economic abuse. So we want to make sure that we're assessing for that with our clients. One other study I like to share was a study that was conducted over 2,000 mothers from 20 different United States cities. And it looked at, over a 5-year period, it looked at year one, what type of abuse the mothers had experienced. And so we have economic abuse, psychological abuse, and physical abuse. And then it looked over 5 years later, what impact did this have on the mothers? And what we see is that mothers that experience economic abuse at year one, even 5 years later, reported higher rates of depression and engaged in spanking more with their children. And so we see that this impact of economic abuse really is a long-term impact. We're looking at 5 years here in this study. And so it's really important for us to be helping clients right up front, addressing their financial needs so that they can develop long-term financial safety plans. And one of the things I like to point out here is I like to tell people, if you are in a physically abusive relationship, if you leave that relationship and you're not in contact with the perpetrator anymore, typically the physical violence stops. Certainly not always, but typically it does. Where, however, the psychological abuse may be continuing. So maybe I don't live with the perpetrator anymore, but he continues to call me, or he's driving by my house, he's sending friends to have, you know, Facebook me. And so in order to end psychological abuse, you really need to have no contact with the perpetrator at all. You know, when we know this is often not the case, particularly when there are children involved. But in theory, if you could completely cut off all contact, then most likely psychological abuse would end. Again, not always. However, with economic abuse, and particularly nowadays with technology, you can really perpetrate against someone economically from anywhere in the world without having any contact with them if you know some basic information about that person, which you typically do when you're in a romantic relationship. So it's very easy from another part of the world to open up credit cards, to potentially break into people's bank accounts. So this is something that is very difficult in that it's hard to prevent and it's hard to end often. And again, the other thing I think that we see why it has such a long-term impact is it really impacts you long-term financially. So if I don't feel confident in being able to manage my finances, if I don't have the education or the employment history when I'm on my own now because of the abuse that I've experienced, if I'm having difficulties providing for my children financially, that's going to impact me. If I have 7 years of ruined credit because of this relationship, and so even if the abuse has ended, that impact on the victim and her children financially can go for a very long time. And so this is why, although we certainly want to be addressing all forms of abuse, why economic abuse is something so critical for us to be talking with our clients about, and again, really engaging in kind of short-term and long-term financial safety planning around those risks. So now that we've talked a little bit about economic abuse, how do we talk about economic abuse with clients? So I've mentioned that often clients don't come to us saying, hi, I'm here because I'm economically abused. And so that means that we really need to be facilitating this conversation with the clients. So the first thing I always tell people is we need to be asking about it. Often, you know, finances is something we're told you're not supposed to talk about in public, you shouldn't share that information. It can be uncomfortable for us to talk about financial or economic problems, and so the first thing that we need to do is that we need to be putting it on the table. We don't want to wait and hope that the client talks about it. We want to be asking about it. And so, you know, using any of those great social work open-ended questions, how do you and your partner decide how to manage finances in your relationship? And getting a sense of kind of what occurs in the relationship. Do you feel that you have a say in the way money is spent in your relationship? Do you feel that you have access to finances in your relationship? Again, any of those questions that kind of opens up this conversation with clients to understand about what's happening financially. Certainly we want to normalize any experiences of economic abuse that clients are going through, and this is true in any work that we do with victims, that often reminding clients that economic abuse is a tool that perpetrators often use to gain and maintain power and control over their victim, and really normalize and validate that experience for the client. And we want to be able to assess their financial safety. So if they're telling us that there's economic abuse occurring in the relationship, again, being able to use some of those social work open-ended questions, such as what concerns do you have in this time in regards to your financial situation, what fears do you have around your finances, and getting a sense from the client of what they feel their financial risks are and what are their priorities within those risks that they're identifying. And then working with the client to develop a practical financial safety plan. And so what that could include is first talking with the client about short-term financial safety. And again, we want to remember where the client is when we have this conversation. We know that some clients that we're talking to are still in an abusive relationship. Some are going to make the decision that they want to stay in that relationship. Some are going to make a decision that they want to leave. And some may have already left an abusive situation. And of course, we want to respect where that client is in that relationship. And so certainly as we have this conversation with clients, wanting to make sure that any behaviors that financial behaviors that they choose to utilize are not going to increase their safety risk. So for example, if you have a client that is currently in an abusive relationship, one of the short-term financial safety plans would be around putting aside money and kind of collecting legal documents and putting those aside. So if at some point she decides to leave, she has some cash or a debit card or a small bank account and legal documents, identifications available if she needs to. But again, for some clients, putting money aside may put them at risk. If that's going to escalate the perpetrator's behaviors or physical violence, then we would not want a client to do that. And so again, we're really going to use that empowerment approach that Rita talked about at the beginning to talk with clients about kind of here are some ideas around financial safety planning. You know, if you do this, how do you think that this will impact your situation, and which ones do you think would be a good choice for you at this time? So other ideas that you could talk about would be things like securing passwords to financial institutions, utility companies, and telephone services. So if the abuser has access to your bank account passwords, can you change those? This is often true with, you know, email passwords or any other technology passwords that you may have. Changing ATM and debit card PIN codes, and again, for some victims, it's also opening up their own bank account and being able to put aside money separately from a shared account. Again, collecting financial paperwork, taking a financial inventory, so if they can find out where is their money being stored, what bank accounts are they using, you know, do they own property, any information that she can collect about her financial inventory. Documenting joint property, making adjustments to insurance plans, wills, or trusts, so particularly if the victim has left a relationship and plans to stay out of the relationship, being able to make those adjustments to the insurance plans, wills, or trusts. Obtaining a copy and monitoring your credit report. And this is something certainly that I know financial social work talks about and sometimes offers webinars about as well. But I usually tell victims, you know, remind them that they can check their credit report every 12 months for free. And for those that are actually really concerned about their credit being exploited, what we'll do is instead of checking once a year with all 3 companies, we'll break it out, and every 4 months they'll run a credit report from one of the 3 companies, and that way they can kind of monitor over time if any credit exploitation is occurring. And obtaining an order of protection if this is an option that's going to be safe for the victim. And on an order of protection, you can make financial requests. So you can request that child or spousal support is paid. You can request mortgage or rent payments continue, temporary possession of property like a home, car, clothing, restitution for medical expenses and property damage. So being able, you know, for clients that have a restraining order, being able to have that in writing on the restraining order so that they have financial support while the abuser is out of the home can be really important for clients. And the other thing we want to do then is start working, that's kind of our short term, what do we need to do in the moment to protect you financially, whether you're in the relationship or leaving the relationship. And we also want to be working with clients on long-term financial safety plans. And this is something that certainly we could spend hours talking about, and I know the financial social work certification teaches many skills around this, and so helping clients set financial goals that feel realistic and doable to them, helping them create and utilize a budget, strategizing ways to save, helping clients manage debt and learn how to pay debt down, understanding banking options, understanding insurance options, helping clients review and improve their credit score, understanding loan options and the loan application process, and learning about home ownership options. And again, what we're really looking at in long-term financial safety planning is helping the client develop financial skills, helping them feel confident in their ability to utilize those skills, and then helping them engage in those behaviors over a long-term period of time. And this is where, you know, I always tell social workers, this is where we're really bringing skill sets into the field. Because certainly, you know, we're not necessarily financial advisors and we're not necessarily financial experts, but what we do is we have the skill sets to combine to the financial knowledge with really an empowerment approach. And this is particularly important when we're working with victims because many of them have been through abuse experiences where an abuser has told them, you'll never be able to do this, you don't know how to manage money, you can't handle this, they may be in a state of crisis. They may be feeling very overwhelmed. And so it's both the knowledge but also our approach and our empowerment approach that's really going to make it work, that you can't have one without the other. And so a lot of times what we talk about here at Safe Horizon is making sure that we're always taking a client-centered approach. So when we talk about a client-centered approach to financial literacy, this means that we're engaging with the client and we're building a relationship of trust. We're validating the client. We're creating a safe space for clients to talk about their finances. We know talking about finances is not comfortable, and for victims of abuse it can be even more uncomfortable, and so it's really important that we're having this conversation within a relationship, again, that we've established trust and have really engaged with the client from the beginning. We really want to be aware of the client's emotions regarding finances. You know, that it's not, ultimately there's always emotions wrapped up in money, right? It's never just money. And so this means a lot of times talking to clients about finances, and also means we have to include what are the emotions that are coming up for them around those finances. And again, you're going to hear this with clients. You know, the example I give a lot is when you have a client that has been abused emotionally and now can't afford, you know, shoes and a jacket for their child over the winter, that can be a very hurtful, very shameful thing for a parent to talk about. And so really, again, normalizing this experience, validating them, and really being aware of those emotions that are wrapped up in the finances is going to be key to having this conversation in a productive way. Utilizing a non-judgmental stance. You know, we can all think of examples where someone has sat down to do a budget with a client, and the practitioner says, well, you don't need to spend money on this, you shouldn't put money there, you're spending too much here, and you know, that judgmental approach is going to immediately shut a client down. And so really, you know, our goal in financial literacy is not to tell clients what to do or not to do with their finances, but to give them the tools and facilitate a conversation so that they can decide what's the best approach to take with their finances. We want to understand and have a conversation with clients about the motivation behind their expenses. And again, an example I give a lot is, you know, it may be easy for me working with a client to say, you know, do you really need a TV and an HBO plan? You know, I don't think so. You don't need to spend that money. But if I talk to the client about, you know, why is this expense important, and I find out that this is a single mother and she has 3 kids under the age of 5, and this is the only way that she gets a break in the day, it helps me to understand what is the real need here, and are there ways that we can meet that need more affordable. So instead of then me coming in and saying, okay, well, you can cut this expense, I'm saying, oh, I certainly understand why this is an important expense for you. It must be exhausting, and certainly you need a break. You know, I'm wondering if there are ways that we could still get this need met that may also be more affordable. So maybe we have a TV and a DVD player, and they rent DVDs from the library. And again, it's not coming from an approach where we're telling the client, but being able to brainstorm and understand why are these expenses important, and how can we help the client save and still get those needs met. We want to assess, again, the client's financial safety risks. So what are their biggest concerns, short-term and long-term, around their finances? And then what are their financial priorities? What do they want to work on first? Where do they want to begin? And again, that seems obvious, but it's really important when we work with this population because it can be very overwhelming. And so helping the client kind of tone down into what's your #1 financial priority, where can we begin, and focusing on that, and really being able to take kind of one step at a time in building through that process. And again, that this entire approach is collaborative. It's from an empowerment model where the client is really developing and achieving financial goals, and we're kind of facilitating the conversation and providing the skills and knowledge, but letting the client decide for herself what the best options are, and helping her build up that confidence again in her finances and her ability to manage her finances. So with that, I think we will open it up to some questions. So I'm going to, Rita, I guess I will send this back over to you.
Okay, thanks. So everybody, I see that what happened, Amanda, is everyone was putting in their answers in the question box.
Oh, in the question. Oh.
So I could share those. Let me finish up. Did you want to go ahead and send that back to me?
Yes, let me see if it didn't go back here.
Go up to change presenter.
Let's see. Did that go over?
It did. Thank you. Show my screen. Okay. Amanda, that was really wonderful. It was just so well presented and thorough, and I'm sure that everyone who's with us enjoyed it and appreciated it. I guess none of us really enjoy it because it's not good news per se, but it's real, and what you shared with us was helpful and very informative. And so just before we go to the questions, I wanted to share with people that yes, we do have a financial social work certification. I spoke about it earlier. I just thought I would let you know that there are 5 workbooks. It's self-paced and self-study. Our students have 6 months to complete it. It does include that part about feminomics and the gender of money, which is so important for women to understand. There is an online exam, and our students have 2 weeks to complete that. Interestingly enough, we do have a particularly strong component with a lot of original materials on helping clients find a job. Our students go through the certification personally as well as professionally because we know how important it is that our graduates be healthy financial role models as well as financial resources and referral sources. So that is what we are about at the Center for Financial Social Work. This is something I've never shared on a webinar, but might be of interest to some of you on the call, on the webinar, and on Facebook. We do have a small Feminomics Money Coaching group, and you can see that here and see how you could join us if you'd like. We post articles on women and money, and we also post a motivational post every day. And our members also share articles and information that they think would be of interest to the rest of the community. And I'm closing with this graphic before I go to the Q&A slides because it's one of my all-time favorites. To me, it represents a woman at peace with her money. And that's something I wish for every woman. So let's go ahead.
Rita. Wait, sorry, before we turn the mic over, if I could just interject. One thing that makes financial social work so special and so different from other financial literacy models is that we very much work with building up the client's self-esteem. And I think that's a very important thing to stress here when we're talking about survivors of interpersonal abuse, because their esteem is really shot down by their abusers. And the whole premise within financial social work is really to work on building up the client's self-esteem in the whole process of while we're empowering them to the path of greater financial security, where it's the path to get there is to help the person feel better about themselves inside. And that's how they're going to be ready to make those changes.
Thanks for putting that in there, Dorlee. That is very important, and it's certainly something that we have seen through all of these many 17, 18 years of financial social work, that people who have financial problems tend not to feel good about themselves, have a lower sense of self-esteem, self-confidence. And so two of the things that are totally woven through the certification, as you well know, since you helped so much to update it recently, is the fact that there is always hope. That's so important because hopelessness closes the door to change. And we need hope to help clients know that we are there for them, that there is hope, that change is possible, that things can get better. And so it is a social work approach, interactive, introspective. We look at the thoughts, feelings, and attitudes that drive financial behavior because that's what determines financial success, financial circumstances. It is a complex process, but I love how Amanda captured so many of the issues. And the fact there were so many times, Amanda, in your presentation that I wanted to say, yes, yes, that's what we do. That's how we do it. So those of us in the field, which is known as financial education, financial literacy, and more recently, financial capability. And from what I've researched, the capability component does include behavioral change, so that's a good thing, but it's hard to use all of those terms, so I was glad that you referred, predominantly to financial literacy. But financial social work isn't exclusively for social workers. Many of our graduates are not social workers. So we have a community of many different people and organizations. So I am not getting questions here, and I have never had a webinar. I don't feel that we've ever had a better webinar, and how come we're not getting questions? I'm wondering if it is something to do with the technology, because originally so many of you couldn't see that one poll that we asked. So let me give you some of the comments, Amanda. Everybody was jumping in. It was just they were jumping in at the question, not at the chat. I think some of the reasons they gave you for why women don't, or why, what was your first question specifically, Amanda?
Oh, what are the barriers that get in the way of talking about financial abuse and financial literacy with clients?
Okay, so we had women's ignorance about their finances. Hold on. There are a whole lot of them. Let me get. Okay. Well, here's a question. What is an appropriate response to women who face financial abuse through the legal system, i.e. frivolous legal action? Great question.
So I didn't hear the end of it. Saying what are their what can
like
they do?
Frivolous legal actions. What can women do who face that form of economic abuse?
Oh yes, that's a wonderful question. And so to kind of give some breath to that for people listening, one of the ways that we see a lot of times, particularly abusers with financial resources, continuing the abuse is going through, as this person said, kind of frivolous legal actions. And so this can be continually bringing the client back to court, whether it's for child custody or, any other kind of financial piece. And for victims, it can get very, very expensive to continue to go to court. And many don't have the resources to continue to pay a lawyer and legal representation. And unfortunately, sometimes that can get very messy. I think this is one of the areas where we could certainly have the potential of doing more policy work. Usually what I do when I work with clients is really encouraging them to get legal representation. If they can't afford it, if they can go through a legal aid, if they can go to a local domestic violence agency that has lawyers available to do pro bono work. and being able to certainly get kind of legal representation around what are their options, and what can they do to potentially not continue going back to court, because that can be a very expensive and long-term process for abusers that continue to use that as a way to try to deplete the victim's resources.
Here's a question or a comment. Sometimes clients feel offended about needing financial literacy. They think because they are poor, they need financial training. Sometimes financial abuse can happen from other family members of the main perpetrator. For example, a mother-in-law who controls the finances in the household as an entitled matriarch. As a matter of course, I think this problem happens more in immigrant communities. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and we talked primarily today about the ways that economic abuse occurs between kind of in the immediate relationship, but what we know is when we talk about money, we're really talking about an entire family unit. And so certainly we're going to see situations where it's not just the perpetrator, but it may be the perpetrator's family members, and that example you gave was a great example. We see that a lot when families are living together in the same household because it's easier to have access. And so that adds complexities to a situation. I also see a lot, again, and we're talking particularly about immigrant families, in the reverse, where part of what the abuser does is the abuser sends money back to the victim's family. Often this money is very critical for the victim's family to be able to survive financially, and so often that's used as a threat. You know, if you don't do what I want, then I'm going to stop sending money to your family. And so using that as a way of really gaining control over the victim. And so anytime we work with clients, we want to be assessing certainly kind of who's managing the money, what are their biggest financial concerns, and getting kind of this broader picture of what's going on in the family as a whole.
We have someone very interested in wanting to know if we've ever heard of Credit Karma. I could answer this. I will let you answer it, but I will tell the person asking the question that we actually had Credit Karma do a webinar for us. And I'm intrigued with Credit Karma. And so when they did the webinar, I was very pleased. And I learned so much. They do so much more than just credit scores. But you can access that on our Financial Social Work YouTube channel or by going to our Facebook page where there is a big red square that says recorded webinars. So Amanda, I'm sure you've heard of Credit Karma. You want to answer any of that?
I have. I was going to say, I think certainly, like you said, they provide a lot of resources to be able to kind of manage your credit and manage your finances. And so I think, like you said, Rita, I'd refer them right back to your page, and they can watch the webinar from them.
There are other similar programs to Credit Karma, I will point out. I don't think that if we need a truly accurate FICO score, that would necessarily be the way to go, but certainly when you're working with clients and we don't have the resources to be pulling FICO scores all the time, I think very highly of the work that they do, but certainly not in a position to recommend one over the other. I'd like to share with you, Amanda, that people are saying how great this was, amazing presentation, so much wonderful and useful information. Here's a question. Are there any resources for the abuser, things to provide the abuser to be less financially abusive? Wait, I think there's more. Wait, let me scroll down. As a financial coach who deals, oh no, that's a separate one. Go ahead.
You know, I don't know of really any formal programs. I think perpetrator programs in general are something we don't know a lot about in the field. And so I think mostly of what's being developed is work around perpetrators around physical violence and often ignoring economic violence. You know, a lot of times what we'll see in relationships is a victim may go through a legal process, they may get a restraining order, they may call the police, and unfortunately what happens is some perpetrators then may stop physical violence, but then switch to continuing to engage in psychological and economic abuse. And so I would love to hear from people if they know of perpetrator programs that focus on economic abuse, but I have not come across any at this point.
As a financial coach who deals with many victims of economic abuse, I've truly benefited tremendously from this webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's see what else we have here for you. Someone expected the webinar to cover human trafficking, but that was not included. I think this was probably addressing your question about why we don't talk more with clients about it, and figuring out when to start talking about it, how much of a rapport should be developed before starting to talk about such a personal topic. And I think, you know, since you opened with that, then you gave such great advice about how to go ahead and do that. I think that's why people are thanking you so much for your presentation, because you really did, you know, cover so much of it. People are asking for your contact information.
I was going to say that's not up there, but people are welcome to contact me. I have a Twitter account that people are welcome to follow, or also my email, which is just my name, amanda.stiliano@safehorizon.org. So that's another way that people can get in contact with me.
Also, someone is asking that, or saying that we had at a previous webinar mentioned that the certification was available on a payment plan through PayPal. If you go to our certification page on our website, that information is right there. Someone wanted to know how to do that. It looks to me like, just a comment, I've worked with DV victims and had very wealthy clients. There is truly no discrimination to who victims are.
Yeah, and you know, I actually think that's a really important point, because it's,
Yes.
You know, certainly we're going to see abuse, but particularly economic abuse across socioeconomic status. But it's also probably the only form of abuse that actually looks different across different socioeconomic statuses. So when we're working with women in poverty or low income, typically they're negotiating a cash-only economic system. They're often not using credit cards or engaged in bank accounts, and so we have to think around kind of cash systems and informal networks. And when you're in a cash system, you can't go below zero. However, what we see with more middle class and upper class women is we see kind of this going way below zero and developing credit, and so the kind of long-term damage can be even more detrimental for people in kind of upper and middle classes.
Amanda, somebody put here not having enough information or resources, you know, to address it with the clients, but not enough time when other needs take priority. And I've heard that so often through the years, which is why I love that graphic I shared on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where this really is, you know, so important at addressing economic abuse. What would you say to someone who says to you, oh my gosh, you know, there's so many other things, you know, they need to be safe, their kids need to be okay, they need food, they need housing. Where do you put that then?
Yeah, they're all important. Often the way that I look at it is that nothing else can happen if they're not working on the finances. So if we get them housing but they haven't learned to budget, they're going to end up losing the housing. And so often these issues become very intertwined. And that's where I think, what we would kind of say at Safe Horizon is taking this client-centered approach and being able to understand what are all the risks, including the economic risks that are occurring, and really helping the client decide what are her priorities and making sure that we're not kind of coming in with the assumption of what the priorities are, but letting those priorities come from the client and working from there.
I think we will close with this one, which was someone saying that some advocates don't think about the economic aspect because they're thinking of the violent crime committed.
Sure.
And we know that's true.
And I think, working with clients myself, when you hear about physical violence, it's hard not to want to address that immediately because it's so uncomfortable and it's so scary as a practitioner to hear that. But often when we start, and again, not always, but often when we start talking with clients, sometimes what we'll hear are clients saying things like, the bruises will heal, but what I need to be able to do is I need to find a way that I can be independent so I can leave. And so really helping, have that conversation with the client about, what is it you really need in this situation? What are your risks? What are your priorities? And kind of letting them guide that discussion so that we're not always going to the physical violence because, it's what we think is the priority, letting the client make that decision.
Well, unfortunately, I think also that very often those of us in the helping fields may face financial challenges of our own and not feel knowledgeable enough or competent enough. And so there are so many other needs to be addressed. It's easy to avoid this one. But as you've made so clear today, and I just cannot thank you enough, you really raised the level of attention that needs to be addressed to the issue of economic abuse. I thank you so much. I thank you for everyone who attended today, and I hope that we'll have the opportunity to work together again in the future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a beautiful rest of the day, everybody. Bye now.
Bye.